Okay, I'm going to introduce our actuary, Jack Pieper. He's with Select Actuarial Services. I've had the pleasure of working with Jack the past 3 years now. This will be our third study he's done for us, and they've been helping us analyze our data and plan for the future. So here goes Jack.
All right, thank you very much, Bakari. Told Ken this is a tough gig, actuary presentation right after lunch. History. It all sounds the same. Oh, that's loud. I think they did something. It wasn't me. What we're presenting. Go on to the next one. Oh, I think I can control it, actually. All right, so just going to do a quick overview of the purpose of our analysis. What are our objectives? There's a backwards-looking component and forwards-looking. So that first item you see there, estimate the liability for unpaid losses and ALAE, that's allocated loss adjustment expenses. That's looking backwards at claims that are incurred through the end of the fiscal year. What we want to do is estimate what is left to be paid on those claims, your open claims, and a handful of claims that are yet to be reported, but they've already happened through the end of the fiscal year. And so that's a large liability, the largest liability on the balance sheet for the trust. So it has a significant impact on the final position or the financial position of the trust, that liability. That second component, the forecast of ultimate losses for the upcoming 2 years, 25, 26, and 26, 27. That's the forwards-looking estimate, the future claims that we expect the trust to retain. And so that's also an important piece of our study. It's going to inform decision-making. Should the trust take on more or less risk if they're in that position where they have to decide that? Are contributions adequate? Where should we concentrate risk management efforts? The forecast can help guide some of those conversations around those issues, what we expect in the future, and the volatility surrounding those forecast losses in the future. Those liabilities, both the backwards-looking and forwards-looking, they're not paid all at once, as you know. You can't just write one big check and say we're done with them. They pay out very, very slowly in a lot of cases, especially with workers' comp, where it's just a longer-tailed coverage. It can take many years for claims to close. So that third bullet point, we provide you with projections of payouts over the next 2 years to give you an idea with budgeting and cash flows. How much do we expect you just to pay out in claims? The last bullet point, like I mentioned, insurance, as you know, is inherently risky. Even looking at an individual claim, case adjusters may think this claim is going to settle for X dollars, but fast forward a few years, it might be 10 times that amount. It's just very uncertain, and like with baseball, it's not over till it's over, until the claim is closed. Do you really know where it's going to be? But the good thing, the thing that's in our favor, is that you are a pool. So we have the law of large numbers on our side. With everyone's exposures combined, all those claims combined, there's some predictability around that, which is where we as the actuary come in and give our best estimate. But even that is an expected level estimate. There is variability around that, certainly. And so we provide confidence levels to give you an idea of the variance around our expected level estimate. I'd like to include this slide just as a helpful visual. This may be very basic for some of you. Others, it might be new and useful information. But we've got written out definitions, but the graphic, I think, is extremely helpful. Each bar represents the cost of claims that happen in a particular accident year. So the total cost we call the ultimate losses. What is it going to cost at the end of the day when it's all said and done? That is equal to the same bar where you have a paid portion and an unpaid portion. So for any given accident year, you've got some losses paid and some part that's yet to be paid. That is your balance sheet liability. You can further break out that unpaid part into case reserves. That's your case adjusters set one claim at a time. They look at the facts surrounding each claim and set a case reserve. But as we know, there's always surprises down the road, almost always. And in total, in the aggregate, what those reserves are not going to be sufficient. So that's where we as the actuary come in and establish that IBNR reserve on top of case reserves. And it makes up a very substantial part of the overall outstanding liability, but it's very important to recognize, otherwise you're going to way understate the liability on the balance sheet. So that's what we as the actuary do, that IBNR number. And you might hear the term reported losses. For us as the actuary, we generally refer to that as paid plus case reserves. It's essentially what your case adjusters think the total value of the claim is, but there's still more that we need to recognize with the IBNR. So let's get into the overall, just the high-level results of our study. So the first piece, that looking backwards at claims that are already incurred through the end of the fiscal year. As of June 30, 2025, we estimate about $27.4 million outstanding. That is the balance sheet liability reserves for claims and claim expenses that are unpaid. Compared to a year ago, the number was $28.2 million, so about an $800,000 decrease. So that's pretty good news with an entity the size of the trust that's growing and inflation. We usually expect to see that number increase little by little every year. So in a year like this where it comes down, that's a good thing for sure. The circle graph just helps you visualize how much of that outstanding is attributable to the four primary coverages of the pool. Obviously, work comp is your largest exposure. For every one auto claim, there's roughly 5 work comp claims. And work comp claims, too, they take a lot longer to close. There's certain more severe types of injuries that can result in the claim staying open for decades, like a permanent total disability claim where there's just lifetime medical and indemnity payments. These claims can stay open for a very, very long time. So that liability stays on the balance sheet for a long time. But the benefit, though, you're getting some investment income on those funds that are just held. So work comp makes up a very large slice of the outstanding liability. Next is general liability, the red that you see there, 29% of the outstanding liability. There's a lot fewer GL claims, but they're much higher severity. So that's your next largest, and then followed by auto and property. Those are shorter-tailed. Claims tend to pay out a lot quicker with auto and property especially. And that is a very skinny sliver. As you're aware, the property is a huge exposure in Florida, and FSBIT only retains a small portion of that, excluding named storms and floods. The rest of it is transferred to the excess carrier, which is certainly wise. The exposure for property is not geographically diversified. So there's an accumulation of this property cat risk in one state. So it would be highly risky for the trust to say, well, let's retain all of it, because you could have a really, really bad year that hits a lot of members all at once. So that risk is transferred, which is why that sliver is so small. FSBIT retains just a small portion of non-storm and flood claims up to 100K. So a very stable section of the property risk. The outstanding losses are a little misleading to compare one year to the next, because they're subject to timing of claim payments. So if you close a big claim just before the end of the fiscal year, outstanding losses are going to go down. Or if you don't pay it and hold off, it'll seem like outstanding losses increased. So it's just timing of payments. This is more of a true measure of how did things go the last year? What happened with ultimate losses? So as you can see, this is ultimate losses for all years through fiscal year 25 combined. The change from last year's actuarial report to this year's. So across all 4 coverages, there were decreases. So it was a year of favorable experience across all coverages. If everything developed as we expected, it'd be zeros across the board, but we're seeing decreases. So that's really good news to report, so I'm happy to be here to report that good news. If there's ever bad news, I'll send my colleague Cheryl to report that to you. So hopefully that won't be anytime soon. All right, looking forward to the 26-27 year, that's still a little ways down the road, but you're going to have to start thinking about contributions and budgeting for that year if you haven't already. So the 26-27 year, we estimate about $15 million in losses that the trust retains. This assumes exposure growth is pretty stable, assumes that per occurrence retentions are unchanged from what they currently are, and we're comparing that to our forecast in the previous year's report. Pretty much the same amount, roughly $15 million, a slight decrease. So again, you'd normally expect an increase. Just inflation alone, you'd expect maybe a 4 or 5% increase. So to see a decrease is a reflection of good experience. The mix in the circle graph you see is pretty similar to what we saw a couple slides back. Work comp makes up such a large piece of that. It's the largest exposure, followed by GL, auto, and property. There is one small nuance I should mention, that currently there is an aggregate retention in place that's $13,750,000, and that's for the casualty lines, so work comp, auto, GL. So if you were to sum those up for 26-27, it would be $14.25 million. So that's saying if you keep that aggregate retention, we expect it to be hit, in which case losses would be capped at that $13.75 million. That's if you're able to get that. But experience could fluctuate. It could come in below that or above that. Time will tell as things evolve, depending on membership. Exposures could grow significantly if you add a new member or two. That's especially large, but something to think about to inform decision making there. Those forecasts are based on loss rates. So you provide us with your estimate of exposure, and we multiply it by a loss rate to get those forecasts. So if exposure ends up changing, you can recalculate a new forecast based on updated exposure. So for 26-27, for work comp, we estimate 63 cents per $100 of payroll. For workers' comp costs that are retained by the trust, for GL, we estimate about $17.35 per ADA, average daily attendance, you could say per student, essentially. Auto liability, $865 per vehicle, and property, $0.007 per $100 TIV. Again, it's just that small sliver of the liability that the trust retains. If you compare it to our forecast loss rates a year ago, you're pretty much just seeing decreases, especially for work comp, pretty substantial decrease in loss rate, seeing very good experience for workers' comp. Inflation is probably around 2 to 5% that we'd expect to see these increase. So even though property, we have it at a fairly small increase, it's on the low end of inflation. So pretty flat, really, if you think about it in terms of the impact of inflation. So overall, a good experience again. So the next several slides, we're going to look at the individual coverages in greater detail. So we'll start with the largest one, workers' comp. This is essentially a reconciliation of the outstanding liability from a year ago to the end of the latest fiscal year. So last year this time, workers' comp outstanding liabilities were about $16.8 million. Line 2 shows the trust operating another year, retaining another year's worth of work comp liabilities, adds about $8.8 million in liability that we estimate. Line 3 is the experience adjustment. So in an average year, it should be 0. This year, it's a decrease of $1.8 million due to favorable experience. Line 4 shows what was paid out in work comp claims. We expected about $8 million. The actual was about 7.3. So when you put those pieces together, it gets us to that bottom line, about 16.5 million. So overall, line 1 to line 5, pretty stable, which is good to see. This is a very interesting slide. It's looking at ultimate losses year over year. These are looking at your work comp claims. The dark blue is your paid, red is case reserves, gold is IBNR, and our purple is our looking forward number. You can see that work comp is longer tailed. There's red going all the way back, and then that prior year bucket is claims that go back to the 90s. There's still about 17 claims open that are that old. A lot of them have gone to the excess carrier already, so they've kind of maxed out what the trust retains on them, but there's still a few that are open within the trust layer. More likely than not, those are PTD, like lifetime payments, so they're pretty predictable. We know roughly what annual costs are. We know the life expectancy of the person. So you notice we don't put very much IBNR on top of those years. We figure they're pretty well reserved. But the more recent years is where it's more tricky because you've got a lot more open claims that are currently being worked with and you're trying to close those. So there's lots more activity in the more recent 7 or 8 years. So there's a lot more IBNR on those years. The green line is very telling. You could see it is going up. That is what we call exposure. That's payroll. So as you add new members or teachers get raises or hire new teachers, payroll goes up. And as payroll goes up, work comp claims go up. Higher indemnity benefits, just more claims, more teachers, more potential for injuries in the workplace. So it's approaching $1.4 billion in payroll. So the case here plus the IBNR, that's the 16.5 million, the sum of the red and the gold pieces you see there. Pretty well spread out across a large number of years. This is looking at experience over the past year. As the actuary, this is kind of the first place we want to look to see how things have gone the past year. So on the top, this is looking at actual versus expected reported loss development. So in a year, we expect reported losses to develop a certain amount. How they actually land is something else. So if everything goes as we expect, it'd be 0 across the board. You wouldn't see any bars. Where you see up above 0, that's some adverse development. Where you see below 0 is favorable development. So for the most part, you see more favorable development, especially concentrated in those latest 3 years. Now, in our actuarial report, there's an executive summary. I highly recommend you read that, at least the first 8 pages. There's a section called Discussion of Results that really highlights the big drivers, what happened, what claims are driving results. So it's a pretty good read. We spent a lot of time documenting that so you understand what's driving the results. So those latest 3 years, especially 22-23 and 23-24, reported losses actually decreased for those 2 years, about $600,000. We don't expect to see that for years that are that immature for workers' comp, but nevertheless it happened. We looked for all the claims that drove that. There was 30 claims that we identified with large decreases between $20,000 and $150,000 that were decreased. So that's what drove the good experience there. The latest year, 24-25, reported losses are tracking about 7% less than expected. Frequency is down more recently in this latest year. So good results there especially. In the older years, you see less deviation. A lot of claims are closed. There's just a few open claims. A few years popped, 15, 16, 17, 18, 21, 22, each driven by a single claim. that had a surprise. But then other years more than offset that. The bottom kind of mirrors what you see on the top. The bottom graph is showing the change in ultimate losses. So that's where we adjusted our ultimate picks on those years. So in total, that's the decrease of 1.8 million. Now, looking forward to project future costs, what we do is we look at your historical experience and we adjust it because exposure has changed drastically over the last 10, 20 years. So that's why we're looking at loss rates. And then the inflation environment is different too. So we adjust for that. So all these are loss rates stated at the 26-27 cost level, and everything is stated under the same retention level at $500,000 per occurrence. So we sort of restate the old years as if they happened in 26-27, and that helps us make a pick for what you see there in red. So what this tells me is the last 7 years have been incredibly stable, hovering just over 60 cents. So it makes it easy for us to pick that loss rate, 63 cents. And maybe it's erring a little on the conservative side, but from where Aon had it, and we've gradually come down pretty drastically. Last year it was 67 cents. So we're cautiously bringing it down in a level that's more in line with experience, in our opinion. So very stable there for workers' comp. So we multiply that 63-cent loss rate by the projected payroll to get that forecast you see there at the bottom, 8.7 million. Now, as part of our analysis that we do, we break out small and large claims. We separate them because quite often large claims drive the results a lot more than you think. It's just a few large claims sometimes that really change things. For workers' comp, we define a large claim as a claim that's over $150,000. So the last few years where I mentioned it was very stable, each year had about 7 to 9 large claims. And so now we're projecting about 8 or 9 large claims in our forecast to make up about 29% of the forecast. The remaining 70% we estimate to be made up of about 1,000 small claims. So those small claims are just your more routine workers' comp claims, slip and falls, minor lifting injuries, a cut that requires stitches, something like that. They generally return to work pretty quickly and not as much lost time. So those are your more run-of-the-mill, and that's more of a stable subset of the exposure. It's those large claims that get tricky and stay open for a longer amount of time. You'll see this slide for some of the other coverages looks drastically different. So moving on to general liability, we'll kind of look at the same kind of slides we saw for workers' comp. So reconciliation, reconciling the outstanding losses. A year ago, we estimated about 8.3 million outstanding. The trust incurred another year's worth of liabilities. That's line 2, the 3.2 million roughly. Line 3 is the experience adjustment. It was a good year for GL as well, a decrease of about 1.2 million, and total payments were about 2.1 million. We expected payments to be more around 3 million. Partly favorable experience is why not as much was paid out, and timing of claim payments comes into play. There's some randomness to some degree as to when exactly claims get paid. So putting all that together gets us to that bottom line, about 8.1 million outstanding. So pretty stable from line 1 to line 5. These are the ultimate losses year over year. Again, blue is paid, red is case reserves. You see GL is not quite as long-tailed as work comp, but it still can take quite a long time for claims to close. The conversation about litigated versus non-litigated, those litigated claims, they could stay open 5-10 years. But even those that are settled directly, not litigated, they still can take 4 or 5 years. Can take a long time. A lot of the case reserves you see are concentrated in the latest 3 or 4 years, especially the latest 2. You see 23, 24, and 24, 25, almost nothing paid hardly. So there are still big question marks on those years. Case adjusters have set what they think, is a good estimate, and we've added some additional IBNR. So looking at 24-25, the case reserve is already higher than the year before, even though it's a less mature year. So that tells us 24-25 might be a rougher year than 23-24, but it'll take a lot of time to see things play out, at least another 2 or 3 years on those years. The green line is average daily attendance, so it's fluctuated a bit over time as members left or joined, but generally it is trending up. So the trust is taking on more and more exposure, and you can definitely see that in the experience. The issue about fighting cases to the bitter end is something we hear a lot, how it can really be costly. Legal expenses can make up a huge amount of the claim if it's fought a little too hard. So it's a hard line to walk often. You don't want to just pay everybody who makes a claim, but then you don't want to fight it to the bitter death and spend a lot more than you need to. So a very difficult balancing act that we see pretty often. Outstanding losses are $8.1 million, like we saw. So that's the sum of the case reserves plus the IBNR. This is the comparison chart. Overall, really good experience. You can see most years are below the 0 line. In our report, we point out the 18-19 through 2021 years, that slightly older chunk of years that's below the 0 line. Reported losses on those years decreased about $500,000, and at the same time, open claims decreased from 28 to 10. So you closed a whole bunch of claims for less than your case adjusters thought. So that's very good results there. For the more recent years, they're still pretty green, but we're seeing losses tracking substantially less than expected. And like I already brought out, the 24-25 year is a bit high, but it is still green, and we'll still have to wait and see how that year evolves in the next few years. There was one surprise, that 16-17 year. You see a little pop right there. That was one older claim, about 8 or 9 years old, increased $115,000, and it was open as of June 30th with about $120K reserve on it. So claims can definitely linger with GL as well. The bottom shows the corresponding adjustment to the ultimate losses, overall a decrease of $1.2 million. Now this is a picture of the historical loss rates for GL. These are inflation adjusted, and you can see there's quite a bit of volatility year over year. GL is definitely a higher severity coverage. There tend to be a handful of 6-figure claims that come up every year that can drive results. So if your ultimate losses are between $1 and $3 million, you can imagine a few $200,000 or $300,000 claims are going to make a really big difference, whether you have them or not. So our forecast rate is sort of an average of the last several years, and that's where we get the $17 rate, $17 per student roughly. Now this slide I think is extremely interesting. This shows the total forecast, so the $17 rate multiplied by almost 200,000 students, $3.3 million forecast. We expect about nearly 70% of that to be attributable to only 11 large claims. And for GL, we count a large claim as one that exceeds $100,000. So that's really telling, that just such a small amount of claims are driving a large chunk of the losses. And then you've got about 80 claims, so it's kind of flip-flop what work comp was. You remember work comp had the larger part was the more stable part. It's the opposite with GL. So your small claims are just more routine type claims. The larger ones, type of claims we're seeing: student injuries on the playground, SAM claims, sexual abuse, molestation allegations, violence, bullying, civil rights discrimination, incidents on school buses. I'm guessing that's kind of similar to what you all are seeing. And sometimes you see unique cases and you think you've seen every single situation, and then some crazy claim happens that you never even dreamed of. It's always something. So that makes it really hard to manage these type of claims, because you never know what's going to happen next. So they're very unpredictable. And some of these claims, the tort limit doesn't apply. It just goes out the window. And then legal expenses can go through the roof. So these are highly volatile with GL. The next two coverages are a lot easier. Auto and property are very small. So we'll go ahead and jump into auto. Outstanding losses a year ago were about 2.9 million. Incurring another year worth of liability increases that 2 million, minus experience adjustment of $1 million. So another good year for auto in terms of experience. And then we're going to subtract out payments of about 1.5 million. And that actually was pretty close to our projected payments for auto. And that gets us to line 5, about 2.3 million. So that was a pretty large decrease in the outstanding liability for auto. These are your year-over-year ultimate losses. Claims close fairly quickly for auto. So pretty much all your auto claims are going to be closed after 4 or 5 years. You don't see much red case reserves beyond the 2021 year. And again, like we've seen, the pool is growing over time. So you expect claims to increase over time, and contributions are increasing over time as well. The 2021 year stands out as a pretty big pop. There were 7 claims that year in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. When you have a bus accident, you can have multiple claimants. So you might hit that full tort limit of $300K. Nevertheless, over the last year, experience was very favorable across the board. All of those latest years saw favorable development. There was, in the 21-22 year, a noteworthy closure on a bus accident. It was initially reserved at $268,000 and ended up closing for $126,000. So that was favorable. And even in the more recent years, we saw good results, especially the latest year, 24-25. Reported losses were 27% less than we expected for auto. So good risk management there for auto, or good luck, one of the two. But frequency we're seeing come back down. It kind of went way down during COVID and then spiked and is starting to find its way back down again. So in total, we see the change in ultimate loss is about $1 million decrease for auto. Here's your inflation-adjusted loss rates. This is cost per vehicle. As with GL, there is a fair amount of volatility year over year, usually driven by those large claims. So if you have more than 5 claims over $100,000, it's going to be a worse than average year. I got to point out 1920 is extremely low. You could probably guess why. COVID, schools were shut down, not very many cars on the road. The buses were probably parked for half the year. There was only 1 claim that year over $100,000. So that's what a year looks like that has 1 large claim. We expect about 5. And then here's the chart we saw previously. This is kind of in the middle of GL and work comp in terms of small versus large claims. So about 50-50. So about half of our forecast we expect to be made up or attributable to 5 large claims. Probably more severe accidents involving school buses, perhaps, serious injuries. And then the smaller claims, 220 we expect, just more predictable, run-of-the-mill auto claims, fender benders, with very little or no bodily injury. Last is property. Definitely the smallest exposure of the ones we've talked about so far. Line 1, 279 outstanding a year ago. We expected the pool to incur another $600K by retaining another year's worth of property. Line 3 shows a small experience adjustment, $76,000 decrease. Line 4 is payments, about $367,000. We expected about $500,000 in payments, but again, with such small dollar amounts, 1 or 2 claims, the timing could be a little different and it would look very different. So line 5 is just happened to where the outstanding landed at the end of this fiscal year, $400,000. And as a reminder, like I already mentioned, the trust retains the first $100,000 of claims minus member deductible and excluding named storms and floods. So, fires, I think pipe bursts are probably covered, things like that. Now, don't be misled by this chart. The scale on the left-hand side is a lot smaller than the other charts we looked at with the other coverages. So at the low end, you've got years hovering around $100,000 or $200,000. The green line is TIV, total insured values. Those have really skyrocketed over the last few years. And we've seen that. It's driven by maybe new construction, new members. Inflation is a really significant driver. We've seen property appraisals and everything jumps up 15% in 1 year. So it's expensive to replace buildings. But very short-tailed line of coverage. Once a claim is reported, it's repaired and paid out fairly quickly. So you only see case reserves in the latest, 2 or 3 years. And we don't even have essentially no IBNR because it's pretty clear-cut, the value of the damage and case adjusters, what they estimate. We tend not to see upward development beyond their reserves, so we stick with that pretty much. Again, don't be misled. The scale on the left-hand side is very small. So we're only talking activity of a handful of claims here. 23, 24, there was a late reported claim, which is a little unusual for property. Usually you know about them right away, but it must have happened at the end of June and you didn't hear about it till July. So a full limit late reported claim came in, but at the same time, another claim that we thought was full limit got a big recovery and closed with no payment. So it turned out to be a good year anyways. And the 24-25 year is tracking nicely, about 12% less than where we expected. So the net change, the decrease of $76,000, which is pretty small compared to the other coverages. These are your loss rates, looking at just the retained layer of BSBIT. Again, fluctuation over the years, but more recently it's been pretty stable. And I apologize if you got a print copy. 24, 25 was a bit overstated. I think some claims that shouldn't have been in there got snuck in, but this is the correct number. So in red, we project about 0.007 cents, or no, dollars. Is that 0.7 of a penny per $100 TIV, which is where we get that forecast, I think about 700,000. Now, this last slide is, I think, extremely interesting. Now pay attention to the left-hand scale. It's extremely large now. These are your ground-up unlimited property losses that we get from the loss run. The blue is the retained portion of those property losses. So that's what we've been talking about so far, just the retained property claims. And that's, you might need binoculars to really see it at this scale. The red is the property losses that are transferred to your excess carrier. So they're pretty substantial. If you go back to 0405, there were some 4 significant hurricanes, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean, that drove those large losses there. In 05, 06, Dennis. And then we have this long stretch of very minimal hurricane losses until 22, 23, literally off the charts. If I made the scale that big, you wouldn't see anything but that year. So it's up to 150 million. That's Hurricane Ian, the damage from that. The next year, 23, 24, of course, that's when we started as the actuary. Please don't blame us. We didn't cause that. And of course, there have been more hurricane losses in the subsequent years. 23, 24, not as bad as the year before, but still not great. That's Hurricane Idalia. And then more recently, 24, 25, you've got Debbie, Helen, and Milton. Helen was the most severe, causing the majority of that. So I want to point this out, not because it doesn't directly impact the balance sheet, the reserve for unpaid claims, it's not in there because it's transferred, but there is an indirect impact in terms of your excess premium, which is a really significant expense for the trust. And y'all live in Florida, so you know it's just the nature of life in Florida. It's the number 1 state for hurricanes, so the cat risk is not small. Looking forward, it's really hard to estimate. The actuaries working for those insurance companies, I don't envy, because it's either going to be a giant number or it's going to be nothing. So our best estimate is something around the neighborhood of 40 million, but so far I won't even say any prediction about how things are going this year. I guess you can breathe a little once hurricane season's over, but very volatile. So you are wise to transfer that risk, but it explains why those premiums are so expensive. But overall, the main takeaway from our analysis is that as far as what the trust retains across 4 coverages, it's been a really excellent year in terms of experience. And so we expect it would impact net position in a pretty favorable way. You have a question, Stephanie? You know, I would say they're most likely lumped in with the auto liability. Yep.
Because when they are funding the loss fund, the property and the APD are together. So I was just curious if it was with the auto liability, if it was under the property.
Okay. Yeah, they're lumped in with the auto. So I assume I did look at this at one point, and it was a pretty small proportion of the auto claims. Of course, like with property, they're going to be easier to reserve, and they're not going to see much development. If a car crashes or a bus, you know what it's going to cost. So it's no doubt blended into the auto experience. But we can carve that out if you need us to at any point. Any other questions for us? Thank you again for having me. But speak up if you had any questions. All right.
I do. Oh, whoa, I have a question. Yeah. You're not getting off that easy. You're not. So again, we don't see the actuarial report, but once a year. And so just looking at this, if there were one thing that you can look at our data and say you can be really proud of this fact, what would that be?
Repeat that again. If I could look at the data.
So you look at actuarial reports all the time. You know, you're calculating the data. What is good about this report, or something that we can be very proud of or brag on?
I'd say the fact that frequency is down across all your coverages is a good thing. You know, when we're looking at the auto rates in particular, you know, a lot of folks speculate that around COVID right here, a lot of your really experienced drivers for school districts left and never came back. I don't know if that's true for you all, but so once things got going again after COVID, all these new drivers who were inexperienced, there was a bunch of accidents all of a sudden. So that could be what's happening here. But as time goes on, they're getting more training and they're getting more experience, and there's less accidents. Maybe people have learned to drive again in general. So we are seeing frequency come back down to normal. Same thing for GL, same thing for work comp. So that's a good thing if claim frequency is coming down. Severity is going to be a harder one to control because you get some unexpected huge claim and it blows up severity. But as far as we're seeing, that's holding pretty stable. We're not seeing a surprising increase. It's kind of holding steady or along with inflation as you'd expect. So frequency coming down, that means less frequent occurrences of claims for the level of exposure. That would tell me that risk management efforts are paying off to control claims from happening, to stop them from happening. So I think that's something to be proud of, that frequency is coming down.
Very good. So you know what's coming next. Then
What's that?
If there's something that we need to work on, or you looked at this and says, this is something I'd keep an eye on in the future, what would that be?
Whew. Those large GL claims would keep me up at night. Just not knowing the right approach to take with them. Not saying it's an area to improve on, it's an area to continue focusing on, because GL saw great results. Continuing to work to close claims quickly. Generally, when you close things quickly, it results in lower costs. So the quicker you can close a claim, the better. It's when things stay open and it becomes a big fight, do things escalate and get worse. So I'd continue focusing efforts there. But you've clearly seen good results this past year. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so thank you, Jack. We appreciate that good information. It's always good to see, that we're heading in the right direction. And I would be remiss if I didn't brag about the report that Jack and Cheryl gave last January when we were here, that we are AAA rated. So we always want to hang our hat on that, so we know we're heading in the right direction. Okay, so this next segment, we know that we have had some changes in terms of trustees that are representing our districts. We've had, there's always a change in superintendents, risk managers, all the people that are associated with FSBIT. We also know that term limits are coming, and so we decided to invest a little time on really an orientation to FSBIT. And so we have developed nine or 10 different modules, and so they are all done. They have all been posted. They are all ready. And so if you scroll up a little bit, Keith, you'll see that this is our homepage. There is a link to this that is in Diligent. The password is there. You can see our first one is Introduction to FSBIT. The second module is, so Introduction to FSBIT, just, who are we? Who do we represent? What just some individual data about us collectively. When you go over to the trust governance, that's talking a little bit more about our trust document and the policy and bylaws, and that really does an in-depth look at what the contents of those, including what does it mean to be a trustee, what's the duties of a trustee if you've been elected by your school board in order to fulfill that role. So lots about the business aspect, the hierarchy, the org chart. So anything about the governance of our trust. The third module, thank you, Phil, for putting it together. He talks a little bit about the advantages of pooling, and just as we were talking about the economy of scale, the being able to pool our resources together collectively. And then I do the second part of that, which is identifying our partnerships with our vendors that are out there that do work for us, so you can recognize some of those names as you make decisions for the trust going forward. The next one is the insurance coverages, and that is done by Stephanie. Stephanie gives us the one-on-one. Here are the different policies that we have out here. She talks a little bit about what some specific claims examples would be that would fall under these particular policies, as well as some deductibles and our current carriers. Then we go into PAM, and that's risk management. So, as you talk about enterprise risk management from a holistic standpoint, what is it that we do in order to help prevent and/or control cost? And then we go over to Module 6, in which both Krista Branham, you heard from her yesterday, and CJ Holly, supervisor of PNC, they walk you through what happens during a claim. So the claim is filed. Here's what we do first. Here's what we do next. Here's what you're responsible for. Here's what we're responsible for, all the way through claim closure. Module 7 is our all things IT, and Keith talks to us about the Origami platform, how data moves from one system to the next in order to meet our own needs in terms of communicating with you and monitoring that claim, but also regulatory reporting. Bakari goes into FSBIT finances. You saw a little bit about what his presentation was like today as he presents his quarterly budget report. So he talks a little bit about our budget as well as our investments. And then Pam talks about the FSBIT resources that are available to all of our members, so that you know the resources that you can tap into and that you can expect if you have any needs in our district. And then Module 10 is last but not least. That is all of us together. You see Pam there. It is myself. It's CJ. It's Bakari, Krista. All took a turn in walking over the strategic plan and what our goals and action steps are for that. So we think that if you finish all of these 10 modules, which I am happy to report, some of them are very short. The one of them is 4 minutes long. The one you're going to watch today is only 12 minutes. So what the executive committee had suggested as we look at this, we would do one of these modules every meeting, and that way the next 10 meetings that we have, you would be complete. So today we are going to watch module number 1, and you can see it's 12 minutes and 11 seconds. So Keith, if you would play it, I'm going to step out. There is nothing worse than watching yourself on a video, so I will be out in the hallway.
We're just a tiny bit ahead, but we'll go ahead and have our break now, and then we'll come back at, I think, 3:30. Is that correct?
Did we use that one?
No, you didn't.
Ready? Welcome, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. What are you doing laughing? So, Pam had led our risk managers meeting back in February and had spoken with us. And some of you, Santa Rosa may be the only one that was out of the loop, but some of you have already opted in to the FROC and the KPMG grant system. And so Pam had sent out the information in June and then refreshed us in February, and then refreshed us in June. And so Santa Rosa opted in, and we've begun our process, gotten some players on board in our district to complete the disaster readiness assessment. And so Allison Blevins had come over from the Florida Department of Emergency Management and done kind of a one-on-one, not really a training, but an introductory session with Santa Rosa. And so I had asked her if she could speak to us today, but alas, she's been bragging about it, but she's going to Italy. But she has a wonderful replacement for us, and Zach Bell has so graciously agreed to come and present to our membership today. And so Zach is a Deputy Programmatic Review Lead / Insurance Specialist with Florida Department of Emergency Management. And no, I did not AI that title. That's his real title. And he has 8 years experience with the Department of Emergency Management, 6 of that in recovery, 2 in mitigation. And so one of the things that he and I were kind of visiting about a little bit today is that with our pooling, sometimes, and I want to knock on the maybe one of those cutting board or charcuterie boards, but I haven't had to go through some of the challenges that some of your district has had with FEMA and disaster recovery. But this system with FROC really creates a scenario, a framework where we have to be proactive. So we're not at a storm. We've got things in place to account for some of our daily activity reports, permanent work that's being done, and really it helps us to streamline our recovery from FEMA. And so it's really about streamlining, being organized, but also being proactive. So Zach, thank you very much for being with us today. We really here with us today, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I am happy to be here. Now, one thing you'll notice about me is I like to wander, so I'm going to try to stay with the camera as much as possible, but it'll probably save on equipment if it does not catch my face as often as it could. So, as Ms. A says, insurance is one thing that I am the quote-unquote specialist of over at FDEM, specifically with the Public Assistance Program. Now, when we talk about insurance, one of the main things that you're going to come against with FEMA in trying to get those reimbursements back to your school boards is duplication of benefits. 2 CFR 200 subsection 252 lays out all of the requirements by law that the Division of Emergency Management must maintain and track along with FEMA in order to not go to jail. It's taxpayer dollars, and we want to make sure it's going in the most effective way to help the taxpayers. So, why am I talking about this when there's FROC to talk about? Well, that's because every good story has a prologue, and here's this one's. When we have denials from FEMA or a misunderstanding from FEMA about how your entity not only submits claims for insurance, but also how your entity then processes those claims, they will immediately, and I'm overgeneralizing here, but I have seen it enough that I feel comfortable on camera saying this, they will immediately go to a denial due to duplication of benefits, saying that insurance is covering this, therefore, FEMA does not need to participate in this funding. Incorrect. Sometimes. So, why is this an issue? Why is FEMA having a hard time understanding how this works? Well, what it really comes down to is FEMA doesn't understand things like FSBIT or FMIT for that matter. Insurance pools can be confusing at times, especially when the rules can change. They don't necessarily change in the way that you normally think, but your policies might differ for whatever your coverage is. One way in which that happens, if you're not aware, something like business interruption might take place in your policy. Business interruption, especially for schools, horrible things happen. Not too far from my home, I didn't drop that. Not too far from my home in Holmes County, Hurricane Michael devastated Bay County in 2018, October of 2018. When that happened, many students left the area. And as you well know, what goes into your budget each year is how many students you have attending those schools. So you have schools now with fewer students, but the need to rebuild. How are they going to cover those operating costs for those big schools they built to house all those students that are no longer there? Business interruption usually comes into place. Hurricane Michael comes through. Your policy is for $100 million. FEMA takes away $100 million from your projects. Do you know what's not FEMA eligible? What's that? Business interruption, right? You have 30 million in business interruption. FEMA took 100 million. You've now spent 30 million of your insurance payout for something that doesn't even speak to rebuilding your buildings. Can you build back a $100 million building for $70 million in 2025? If you can, I'd check the corners and see if they're cut. So, making this process as clear and as concise on my less angelic days, I might say we need to tell our FEMA friends that the sky is blue and then point up. That's what the purpose of FROC is. It's a great program. Is it different sometimes from what your personnel are doing? Sure. But what we have to focus on here is the opportunity cost between continuing to do it the old way and staying with this frustration of appeals and arbitrations and the lengthy, expensive attorney fees that occur with those appeals and arbitrations, and the headache of, as any new thing does, learning a new system in which you can get those reimbursements faster. There's going to be a learning curve, but I promise you, as we go through it, you will be able to get a hang of it very, very soon. I would highly encourage, if you have not already done so, sign up for FROC. Right now we are focused on categories A and B in the public assistance program, which is emergency work. We are working on forms and files for permanent work, which would be the rebuilding of your schools, for instance, the contents and supplies within those schools. So learning it and implementing it now is going to be an easier graft than were you to wait and try it later when it's a much bigger program. As you can see, we have our fancy dancy QR code up here. This will take you to the SharePoint where you can sign up. Let me move my big head out of the way. And I will be available after this to sign those pictures that you're obviously taking of me. All right. Everybody that wanted to got that? I think you've got these slides, right, that you could push out to everybody, Miss A? Okay, perfect. So, aha, your agenda. The fancy agenda. Here we go. All right, so in order to better understand how the documents can help you, you need to understand the types of categories of work that go into the program. Some of you may very well be well-versed in what these categories are. If you are not, this will be good. If you do know, this will be a good refresher. Emergency work. We're talking about emergency. there's urgent and emergency, right? It needs to happen right then. And it is not permanent in nature other than debris removal. So category A, debris removal. B, emergency protective measures. We're talking sandbagging. We're talking traffic control for evacuations. We're talking anything in the EOC, sheltering costs. Those types of deals would all be Cat B. Roads and bridges in permanent work, that's going to be Cat C. Water control facilities, Cat D. Your buildings and equipment are Cat E. Cat F is utilities. Cat G is the catch-all. It's the Parks and Rec. Now, what's recently been implemented in this past year is something called Cat I. It is, show of hands, who's familiar with 1206? Have you heard of that? Okay, good. So 1206 is something that has to do with floodplain management. And why does that matter? Well, because for those of you that are in a special flood hazard area, you know the beautiful system known as NFIP has mandatory reductions that come into play. Within some of those flooding considerations, you will usually have to do a substantial damage inspection. With this, it's something called a substantial damage estimate that can be reimbursed through the public assistance program. It's only for 180 days, and there has to be an expert that is the one that does it. Go figure. So, category I is considered permanent work, although the timeline is different in category I, which is why it's over here. Category Z is your administrative costs. Why do we even need to change the public assistance program? There's too much reaction and not enough being proactive. If I set your shoe on fire right now and then ask you to write me a 5-page essay on Emily Dickinson and her contributions to the English language, you might knock me over the head and finding the water bottle. Why would I ask you for such a weird thing in this time of an obvious emergency where there's threat of bodily harm? Why would you wait until a hurricane has knocked down 4 of your schools and you're looking to try to find a temporary facility to house some of your families? Why would you use that time to provide your insurance policy? Or know what your payroll is? Or know how you're going to backfill for your furloughed employees with the sheltering, right? Being a Boy Scout growing up, I grew up to be an Eagle Scout because Mama made me because I wanted to be able to drive, and that was the rule. You got to have your Eagle Scout if you want to get your license. So growing up, there was the motto that always stuck with me is be prepared, right? You have to rethink recovery. We've got a fancy new slogan called Prepare to Recover, and as threatening as it sounds, it's actually an encouragement for all of us to change our mindsets so that the good work that we do when disasters hit can actually go further. We are seeing an increase in deobligations amongst the public assistance program. They're cracking down on certain policies. Whether they should or not, they being FEMA, whether they should or not can be a topic of discussion, but the fact is those increase in deobligations and then clawback of funds hurts you. It hurts your citizens. Because whether or not, let's say you get the money back, but it takes 3 years to get the money back. That's 3 years without the necessary operating funds to actually recover. And just like a stuck pig that don't stop bleeding, it don't get better with time. It hurts. And it will continue to hurt until we patch it up properly. So, we've also got a lack of standards. What happens is there are so many good ideas and good things that come through, not only from school boards, but from any and all applicants, that when FEMA sees a Category B emergency protective measures project, none of them look the same. They might all be for emergency protective measures and similar activities, but because each and every one looks different, FEMA sits and says, well, hold on a second. They used a different font. This is Helvetica. These guys are weird. Oh, here's Arial bold, okay? It gives them pause, and they start looking at the minutia of things that maybe they don't really even matter, like font type. When we standardize it, we have a set expectation and a trust with the federal government that, hey, anytime you see this, you still need to fulfill your responsibility to validate, but anytime you see this, you understand and know that there was a level of documentation, a level of intent, and a level of context that speaks behind whatever the form is that they're seeing in front of them. The difference in that and a well thought out plan, but an isolated, well thought out plan, is the difference in everything. When you build a rope, it's a bunch of tiny threads twisted together. Single thread, how easy is it to break? Depends on your knife, depends on how frustrated you are, right? But when you twist those threads together, they combine into something bigger than the sum of the parts. And in this use of FROC, that's exactly what we're doing. We're standardizing it so that everyone's efforts are showing the same level that everyone is putting in. So this bureaucracy can get out of the way of recovery. We also have a lack of risk-based approaches. Specifically, how do we take and look at data and say, okay, such and such school board, you were deobligated for 2 projects and your other projects took 3 years to get funding from the federal government. Why is that? What was the fail point? And how, more importantly, do we stop that from happening? When these things occur, we have to look at it because we can't change what the federal government does. What we can change, as far as their interactions with us on this program, what we can change is where our part of the problem comes into play. We can advocate for each other. The state can advocate for our counties and for our school boards and our applicants to make sure treatment is fair and that we are all being seen for the needs that are there. But we will never change a mind by yelling, no matter how right we are. We cannot appeal to hearts and minds when pen and paper are betwixt us. So, we deal with it with pen and paper, right? To that end, there are 4 pillars of that change that we're looking to do with FROC and that we've implemented to do. Up to this point, does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments, funny jokes, off-color remarks? All right. Please, if you do throughout, let me know, and we can stop and talk about that for a second. So, the 4 pillars of FROC, standardization, which I won't go into any further, but we've talked about the power behind standardizing and unifying that way to make sure that it's accurate. The procurement. I have seen more deobligations based off of emergency time procurement than I think most anything else other than documentation. What do I mean by that? Procurement has to happen when you are getting services to recover, to rebuild, to plus up your workforce for sheltering, whatever it is that you're doing. You have to make sure that that action is being done within your policy limits. When I say policy, I don't necessarily mean insurance policy. This is like your organizational policy. If it's not done that way, then you can have had a specialized meeting in which you've established either a moment of exigency or emergency. Now, you're going to look at me like I'm crazy and say, Zach, that was Hurricane Milton coming down the pipeline. What in the Sam Hill are you talking about? I'm here to tell you, right or wrong, just because there was a hurricane coming down the pipeline does not automatically put your procurement group into a state of emergency in which you can bypass your bidding process. I will say that again. Just because there is a hurricane coming down the pipeline, it does not automatically mean that your procurement group can bypass your bidding process. So, how do we ensure that in those moments of we're doing the most good as quickly as we can, we're preparing, we make sure that your procurement is already in place, that this becomes, for lack of a better phrase, a switch that you can throw when you're done. That you know already, you don't have to spend the mental energy worrying about paperwork, silly paperwork. Important, but when lives and health are on the line, it becomes silly. So, by helping you have your procurement within your own policy and to meet appropriate federal regulations, that's going to shore up that side of your actions. The procedures are kind of hand in hand with that. A lot of times I have seen discretionary pay get the boot right to the britches. Here's a word to the wise: don't use the word discretionary. That will kick it out right away. Now, who determines what is discretionary pay? Well, that's discretionary, right? Somebody's making a choice somewhere. But good luck arguing that. I've already done that. No, but the point is that in this collaboration, we've gone through the brute force of what works with FEMA and how it should look. And so in that brute force attempt, we're trying to make sure we can pass on that knowledge and collaborate with you in the way your system already works, so that your procedures, your payments, everything is up to date and it will meet those FEMA guidelines. You won't be hung up for 3 months with a program delivery manager asking you to prove all of your timesheets because they're not sure if your policy is discretionary or not. Again, you guys are already doing so much. I know I've only gone through 3 or 4 pillars. But to quote one of my most favorite books of all time, Bilbo Baggins, I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you. Right? So that effort can seem like a lot, but trust me, this is here for our benefit at the state, but mostly for yours. Because if you fail, we fail. And most importantly of all, if you fail, the citizens do not receive the services that they so desperately deserve when recovering from a storm. That goes to the last pillar, assessment. We're wanting to make sure that any risk that might exist within your organization is mitigated as much as humanly possible and within policies and guidelines and statutes. To that end, if you employ all these pillars, these 4 pillars of FROC, you could potentially receive up to 85% of funding upon obligation. What that means is this: the state doesn't pay you any money. We don't sit there and decide, I don't like the green shirt this gentleman has on. No money for you today. You're going to be Thursday. Next Thursday, not today. There's no arbitration thing that we get to decide. We are held legally bound to what the rules and statutes are for how and when we can release that funding. When FEMA releases the funding to the state, that is called the obligation. We can only release it once we hit certain validation measures legally. Even if you're a fiscally constrained county, even if you're decimated by the hurricanes, without some sort of divine or legislative intervention, our hands at DEM are kind of tied, which is why we're trying to wriggle out of the knots right now, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we're not collaborating, that we're not actively engaging with Capitol Hill and with Governor DeSantis to work together, and he's got some great ideas on how we can make sure this happens in a timely, effective manner. But it does mean that we have to do our part on the local level because it's a home rule state. You guys are in charge, so we need your help there. So that obligation, when FEMA releases the funding, you've got these 4 pillars put into place and you've got a score of 85 on your DRA, well, we're very likely able to release 85% of that $1 million project right away. The process. First you opt in, then you sign that participation request form. You complete the DRA, the Disaster Readiness Assessment. Again, it's a risk assessment essentially. You don't have to complete an abatement plan anymore. You just need to complete the abatement activities. And then complete and submit a post-disaster questionnaire. Any questions on those steps? Boop. All right. Within the DRA, okay? So step 3. Within the DRA, there's even more steps. It's like a Russian nesting doll. The applicant, you get access to the DRA through the Smart Grant platform. You complete that DRA and you submit it to us. We validate it. And then once we validate it, you receive your score. That number will represent the percentage of funding, generally, that you should be able to receive upon obligation. Each DRA is broken into either a Cat A or a Cat B. Debris is not the same thing as emergency protective measures, and so there needs to be some various questions. For instance, debris has like monitoring costs. Those are not found in emergency protective measures because you're not monitoring anything really. Those 2 categories are then broken down into 5 subcategories. Your experience with this type of work, your policies and procedures, the documentation relative to each of those categories, your procurement policies, and any contract administration you might have. Any questions on those steps? All right, let's go. So now we'll be going into exploring the FROC forms and documentation. Up here we're looking at how to find those standardized forms. We're on floridadisaster.org. Way down here. Quicker recovery and reduced risk for applicants. Access the FROC forms. I feel like a bad Vanna White. All right. Standardized forms. So you can see some examples here for Category A and Category B. These are what's available to you. All of these are within the FROC forms section on that floridadisaster.org page that we just looked at. Again, bloop. Access the FROC forms. Access the FROC forms. We go to do that. Boom. Right here. If you notice, we already have donated resources, the daily log and the emergency work checklist here. So if you have those entities that come and help, you can capture those that way as well. If you notice, one of the things I wanted to point out is, what do you notice about the daily activity reports over here? If we can see. Yeah. There's multiple types, right? And why would we break out firefighter from police officer? The number of times I've got officers in my family, I'm grateful for their service, and I work with ESF 49 all the time. The number of times I've gotten paperwork back from officers and it just says patrol. Like, Kenny, you're killing me, man. I can't do anything with this, because what they were actually doing was they were doing safety inspections and traffic control for evacuations. But when they just put down patrol on their paper, because they're focused on doing the good in the field, as they should be. They shouldn't get tied down with all this stuff that helps us get the money back to the citizens. It'd be great if they did, but we want to support them in doing their job in the field. So, FEMA explicitly denies patrolling as an eligible activity. That alone has taken weeks, if not months of time with projects. Just trying to get that clarified and cleaned up. Because the time that question comes about is not usually a few weeks after the event. It's several months, if not a year and a half later. And Kenny might have gone on to bigger and better things or been promoted, or he just doesn't remember, because you know how many calls Kenny gets a day and what he's doing in the field? He doesn't know. So we have to prepare to recover. We have to get these things identified beforehand. When you have individuals coming in to assist your team, or when you have an entire team that reports to a single individual and they're performing the same action, the team daily activity report helps you coalesce all of that into a single paper. Again, I was having this discussion earlier. Part of the issue we have at hand here is not necessarily that policy and procedures are not good. There are absolutely improvements that we can make. But policy and procedures are not always followed, or at least interpreted correctly, on the federal side. What do I mean by that? Here's an example. In version 4 of the PAPA G, that's the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, version 4 is very clear that in accounting for the work from your own entity, that you do need to address the work that was being done and the type of work they were doing. However, in parentheses, it says a representative sample of that daily work. Do you know what FEMA asks for 9 times out of 10? All your 214s. All is not representative. So the policy is already set up to expect you to only do a representative sample of what's happening. That's not necessarily being adhered to. So when doing something like this, we've got it solidified into the point that follows the policy and also helps FEMA understand, because they're humans too, and a lot of them sometimes are new. The PDMGs are. So you help them understand where all this policy is coming from. One of the things that you might want to consider for best practices, if you've ever been through a hurricane ever, I don't know many entities that have both internet and power left to them. So you have all these great plans, these files, these things to go and do, and it's on your server. Ooh. Your hotspots aren't even working if you have those. So, have a zip file downloaded of the standardized form folder. Go ahead and have that pulled off of floridadisaster.org. Then make sure that your form is up to date when you check those table of contents. And you're going to make sure that you utilize native PDF or Excel forms, meaning do it on the computer. The amounts of times we've had disagreements of, well, is that a 3 or is that an 8? Because it's been handwritten. It's like, good gracious, just look at the total. What's the difference there? Is it 3 or 8? But stay away from handwritten if you can avoid it. And then you want to look for any type of QRGs or how-to videos that you can use to help out the forms. These, again, can either be downloaded or viewed online. Have them ready for you if you need it. Any questions on any of this? The cookie coma is strong. All right. So, we've talked about the daily activity report already a little bit. I want to go a little bit more detail. They record event-related and non-event-related activities performed by an individual or team. They're general in nature and can be used by a wide variety of applicants and departments to document event-related activities. Please note that while these forms are generic, there are forms specific to certain applicant types and departments, and you saw that up ahead. Within those 214s, you'll also be able, or not within the 214s, within the daily activity reports, unlike the 214s, you'll be able to provide the equipment and supplies as well. Again, we're standardizing it to where everything's collected in one place. May I introduce you to Pat? Pat's a pretty lady. She's new on the scene, but she's already making headway. PAT stands for the Project Aggregation Tool. Essentially, all those FROC forms that you would be filling out, you put into like a card shuffler in the computer, essentially, is what PAT is. PAT puts it into a workbook for you. That's the goal, right? Again, when you opt into this and you go in head first, I know that there are going to be some changes and some frustrations that come with any new thing. But look at the end from the beginning and weigh this opportunity cost. I promise you that if you were to do so in an effective and an objective manner, the standardization that we're offering here with FROC is going to vast outweigh any specialization that you might already have in your system. That's not to say that that specialization has to die. We're just looking to translate, to transcribe, potentially. And in doing so, speed is increased. The speed of obligation, the lack of deobligation, and the ability to recover. So, the requisites before you can actually use PAT. You got to be opted into FROC. You've got to use the FROC forms. PAT can't read your forms from your department. She's coded with a special language. And the old gal only knows one. So, be kind. Also, native PDFs. So, what that means is even if you have a PDF and you've scanned it in, you didn't write on it, it's all computer generated, but then you printed that out for some unknown reason and scanned it and then sent that in, Pat can't read the text. And so what you have is essentially a flat file, meaning, looks like a bunch of squiggles to me, says Pat, and that's all she can do with it. So native means it exists on the computer, it hasn't been scanned in, and it hasn't been handwritten in. There are programs that let you recognize text, but it is not good. They will miss stuff all the time. And then you need to make sure that you have a paid version of Adobe Acrobat, mostly because Acrobat has gotten to the point nowadays where to actually use all the functional parts of it, even the basic functionality, you have to have an account. And you have to have a paid account. There is no partnership with Adobe, trust me. If there was, I'd be up here in an Adobe jacket and shoes and just kicking back, enjoying myself. But unfortunately, that's the nature of the system and the software. And there's no getting around that. There's not a free version of a PDF. Your regional recovery coordinator is Miss Allison Blevins here in Region 1. If you don't know her, you should. She's a good person, good folk, as my folk would say. This is her contact information. You can also get it here. And this is the map for the regional coordinators for recovery and mitigation across all the 10 regions in the state. It's vacant. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. The short answer to that is maybe. No. What we will try to do is make sure that at headquarters right now, we are all working towards making sure that the people that we send out are literate in FROC. And so even if they might not be as much of an expert as Allison or as KPMG have become on the process, they will be there to be able to speak to some extent there. Now, after that is done, a storm happens, right? We're talking about the first 48 hours, first week, whatever that is. We're more focused on the initial damage assessment, which is going to be a different level of documentation than is necessarily going on for FROC, except I've done the damage. I was the damage assessment coordinator last season, and I am most likely going to be for the foreseeable time forward. But the reason I say that is because myself and a colleague have built what we're calling DAT, the damage aggregation tool. And in it is essentially an Excel workbook that will allow the county to collect and aggregate all of those damages from each of the entities within the county itself to report up to FEMA. And that tool will be made available to you. It should be on the website if it's not already.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be very helpful for us to have ahead of time as we work with our emergency response folks. Are you, what do you see the role of a FEMA consultant in this scenario and with this support that's being offered by the state? Let's say in a really big storm, lots of assets involved. Do you see there still needing to be that person coming into play to potentially help facilitate, or do you feel like this process will cover a lot of that support for districts?
So to clarify, to make sure I understand, when you say FEMA consultant, you mean a third party that assists
Correct.
the district with?
Correct.
Okay, FEMA claims. Understood. It's difficult for each and every it's different for each and every district as far as what helps and what's not, or what would help and what would not. I don't want to speak openly for my own hometown school board. This is not Zach, the state person, talking. This is Zach, the Holmes County native, talking. Good, hardworking folks that wear many, 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 many hats. And so as good and as strong as FROC is and will be in the future for permanent work, there's not enough people there even to use the tool. So that might be a community that would benefit still from consulting. That being said, you would want to make sure that, trust should be a given with these third parties. But on top of that, they would need to be literate in the FROC files. You would not want to have to spend your time educating them to essentially do their job except the stroke of the keys. So those are some considerations I would highly encourage you to make, and whether or not that's still something that's necessary for you. If you're a county in which your school board or you as an entity is large enough that you've got plenty of people, I absolutely see FROC maybe not doing away with consulting, but making it that much easier and hopefully reducing time. So this is not to get rid of anything, more so as it is to make what's there simpler. And if that, listen, I'll be real with you. My goal, as silly as it is to work myself out of a job. As a policy, the long, ridiculous title that I had Miss A read out, and that's silly, but it's true. It is the title I have. Essentially boils down to policy consultant. It means I read the policy and the laws, and I put it in layman's terms for you, and I tell you what can work and what can't, generally speaking. If we have something that can do that in a form and make it to where you don't have to call me, not because I don't enjoy your calls, I'd love to talk to you. We'll talk about golf and boating and everything all day, and hunting too. But if you don't have to call me, if it can just be you submitting a form and that then turns into recovery for your areas 50 times faster, let's do that. that might be what the result is when at the end of this. That's no one's goal, but that might be what happens.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah,
Terrific.
absolutely.
Yep.
Zach,
Yes, ma'am.
Sarah and I attended the training, as I mentioned, over in Okaloosa.
Uh-huh.
And this tool, as for an older person like myself, was amazing because you would put in all these PDFs, the timesheet, the daily activity reports, and it would create a file based upon what Zach Bell did, for example, during the recovery mitigation efforts, whatever. And it was very clean, and it looked like it was a very useful tool that we felt like in our discussion that would be really beneficial for, let's say, our payroll departments or even somebody in our maintenance departments. But when we took that class, they provided us information on the biweekly meetings on the PAT demo that I believe Ishmael Colon was presenting.
Yeah.
And so to sign up for those, I'm assuming that you would have to, one, have opted in to FROC,
Yes.
gone through this process. Would you have had to have attended that training for those members here who are engaged in FROC already, for them to be able to attend those sessions?
To attend the demos, you mean, for Pat? That I don't know. I can call Ish. He's not only a colleague, but a good personal friend. So I can call him after this and see what the limitations are. I would be hard pressed to say that were it within his decision-making area of responsibility that he would say no. But there might have been something in that first class that was essentially a prerequisite that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, because I don't know that it would be beneficial if you had not attended that and didn't
Correct.
know, but I think that it's really good for, let's say, not me as the risk manager, certainly to know about it, but the front lines on who's going to be putting in that data for the payroll and then reimbursement for that. I think it would be important. But I know, like right
absolutely.
now, those are every 2 weeks on Thursdays, and they're an hour. So they're kind of like a lunch session, a lunch and learn kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, let's set up this plan then. I'll reach out to Ish, and then if I can email you with that answer that you could push out to the group, I'd appreciate it. Perfect. Good plan. Any other thoughts, concerns, questions, complaints?
I have a question.
Oh, I thought it was going to be a complaint. Okay, go ahead.
Gotcha. All right, so I'm doing the DRA, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It spits out a number, which you guys use to determine what percentage of funds I can get right away. Correct? I'm understanding that part. Do I ever get an opportunity to improve my score?
You do.
Okay.
You do. Every year, you will submit a new DRA.
Okay.
And if you think about it, why wouldn't you? Right? Because let's say you have a 50 or 60 one year for whatever reason, and you've acknowledged those portions that were good, but maybe not great, and you've made that improvement. Why wouldn't you want to get another 10%? Hopefully it doesn't drop. I'm assuming nothing would happen that would make it drop. But yes, every year, not only do you have that opportunity, but every year you must resubmit
Right. Okay.
a DRA. Yes,
Now,
ma'am.
So then, when I get my score, apparently my documents are reviewed.
Yes, ma'am.
correct? So our recommendations given to me along with after my submission is reviewed, our recommendations also provided with my score.
I see what you mean. So let's
so
say
that I can get ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Like, oh, you got a 60, but if you had just done X, Y, and Z, you could have gotten higher. Absolutely. Now, the degree at which those recommendations is going to depend on where your documentation was, the level of detail, and then what was, for lack of a better phrase, missing. And again, it's not a judgment call on how your operation is. It's more of, hey, these are the rules from a FEMA perspective, and this is how close your policies come to either meeting those rules or not. Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Again, my name's Zach Bell. I have my card if you would like it. We'd be happy to discuss anything with you, but please push all information into the, do you have the FROC inbox available to you, Ms. A? How about this? I will make sure that you have that so that all questions and concerns from an FROC perspective, you can push them there and our specialists can get to you quickly. All right. Thank y'all.
All right, I'm standing between you and being finished. I don't know who scheduled me last. Yeah, thanks for the cheers back there, Gerald. Let's see what Keith has for us, and we'll jump in. We're going to talk about performance of the trust. We do this every year, give you guys a little sneak peek at how the data looks in terms of the trust overall. We have some really cool reporting this year from Alliant. Their analytics team has some capabilities this year that they haven't had in the past, so we're really pleased about that. We have some nice data charts. If you're going to see these, and they're going to be way up here, and you're going to be watching, and I'm going to click through them, and you're going to be like, oh, I wanted to see that. So it is uploaded to the presentation. You can pull it up now and slow roll your look to look a little closer at your districts. I'm going to hit the highlights and really talk more about what these reports are and kind of give you a framework for the data that we have. We're going to start, and we have some data last year, but we're starting to build a year-over-year framework that is going to give you longitudinal data that's going to have every year broken out. We haven't had that in the past. Some of the way in which the analytics were pulled was a little more manual, and now with Alliant Systems and their capabilities, we're really excited to be able to have some really cool dashboards and some different things that we're going to bring to the table. Those the dashboards are being reviewed, and we have some of the additional data in the hands of the claims committee. They're going to be meeting and kind of talking about how they can share that data over the next couple of months. And as we speak, Alliance team is also working on drill down district dashboards that will be available to the districts, and the timeline is November. So we're hoping next month we'll be pushing those out to you, and they're going to bore down into your site levels. This is high level district comparison, FSBIT comparison. The drill downs you'll get in November will be about your site data and information specific to different metrics on your individual sites in comparison to your district as a whole. So they're going to be built out in year dashboard clicks where you can click into the year and click into the claim type data. It's really awesome. We're very, very excited about it, and happy to have Alliant helping us with that piece. So let's take a look and see what we've got. One of the things that they have the capability to do is to look at size comparison based on ADA data, on vehicle exposures, and on payroll. FSBIT has had the ability to do exposure comparisons. That's the only data we had. We now have this data where we can drill down and look at size comparisons to give you an idea of how you stand up based on the size of your district on these metrics. So you'll see as we go through that you'll see little highlights. Where's my little pretty little red button? Oh, I don't know. The blue shading, the shading in the tan, those give you an idea of some of the severity metrics for some of the different areas. I've got some of this in here showing you in this chart for you to look at in detail later, but we have some nice little charting for some quick peeks that'll be a little bit easier for you to kind of navigate through. The reason we have 23-24 data, and I'm going to show you some 24-25 data that is not size metric, because we want to know what happened last year, right? Want to take a peek at that. This data is metric against those numbers based on the official data that's pulled for the renewal. So it has a little bit of a lag because of that. This data is 23-24. We'll be able to do those comparisons as we move forward next year. So I put both in there. Again, I'm going to explain to you what you're looking at and give you the opportunity to look at it a little more when you have time. This is a nice quick peek. This is size-based. The reason you can tell the difference between this chart and the chart that's 24-25 is it doesn't have the average line. I've tried to indicate up on the top the data that shows your exposure, and you can do your average. So our average workers' comp frequency of losses is 0.78 on this particular scale, and you can see where the districts fall for that particular year. As we go through, workers' comp is our most stable data point. We have the most data, of course, so you're going to see a lot more consistency. You can see some of the numbers. You'll see some fluctuation, but overall, there's some comparison to how the average shakes out. That is not the case when we get into severity ratings as much, right? Because they're more volatile, as Zach talked about earlier in the actuarial report, but also as we get into less claim frequency. You're going to see a lot of volatility there because E&O, for example, we have very few claims in that area. You're going to see data that looks like, you know, somebody's just off the charts when they may have 5 claims, okay? So that's why we want you to be able to look at this later and bore down, not to panic if you see some shot up number. It may be based on very few exposures, or especially when you look at comparisons to size. I like the size comparison charts. Let me just go back, because what they do tell you is, hey, I'm a smaller district, I have fewer exposures, but how bad is my situation, right? So it gives you the opportunity to look at that average of the trust, and it is based against that size parameter. Workers' comp is looking at payroll, okay? So again, another factor that you have to consider is a district that might have a higher pay per teacher, per administrator, overall higher payroll because of their community that they're in. So that's the comparison data we have for work comp. You have to take that as you look at your particular district. But again, much nicer comparison data than we've had in the past. Workers' compensation frequency of losses. Again, we're still on work comp frequency. This is last year's data. This is strictly based on the how many frequency of losses that you had around work comp for last year. A very fixed number. I've put some of this in at each stop along the way to say, hey, here's some considerations. Here's how this data is calculated. Here's some takeaways. I'm not going to go into every detail. That's for you to kind of look at as you look and dive a little bit more into your data. Every single one of these data points don't inform you like looking at the details of the claims do, right? So we've got to be able to get into the claim details to really get to the bottom of why some of these fluctuations are occurring. But there is, this gives you a place to look, right? Let me focus on this area or that area, and then let me get into my claim detail to dive in a little deeper about what happened here in a particular year comparison. Keith can help with that. If you need help in pulling reports, and I'm available as well to help with certain reports that help you zero in on some of that data that you want to look at closer. Again, this is our 23-24 and our average against how the different districts look. This is straight numbers on severity of losses. So this is your dollar amounts for last year. We know we've talked about the volatility of severity of losses. Again, without getting into your data, you don't know if you have an outlier claim or you have several different issues that center around a particular cause. And you'll see when we look at slips and falls and we look at our key data points that, you know, that's where you're really going to inform why your severity is high. The age of our claimants that we're dealing with, the severity of pre-existing conditions that are exacerbated by different incidences. As we see an older workforce, we're dealing with those challenges as part of this. I love this little chart. It's just this is terrific. So this is a nice quick little snapshot. It kind of summarizes together. This is our work comp data. Again, it's that 23, 24. Those in the little bottom quadrant on the left are your kind of low severity. Oh, sorry. Are your low severity, low frequency. Okay, and then you've got your comparisons, low severity, higher frequency. Here's our higher frequency and severity for this particular area, and then your high severity, lower frequency. So nice little snapshot there to kind of see how all that shakes out. Again, giving you some place to look and focus some attention. Here's our work comp mod rates. Krista puts this together for us, and appreciate her keeping this chart going for us. You can see we've got some 3-year average and all year averages, and we've got your 25 data there. So mod rate, as many of you know, is a little bit of a smoke and mirrors formula, but it is statewide comparison. There is data for all districts within the state, and I think Krista can help as well to point you in the direction of looking at some of that data, but you can see where you fell in comparison to the districts overall, and we like to see the trust average be below 1 or at 1, and so we're pleased to see that trend continue for us, and we want to help districts to get there through some of their mitigation measures. Looks like a congratulations to, to DeSoto. I think they were our 0.47 district there for lowest mod rate. Yep. That's right. A little shout out there. District size comparison for general liability. Again, this is for you to look at later. Gives you a little bit of a framework for how those numbers shake out and what the exposure count was that was used. Here it is in a visual format for you with your averages and the outliers. Again, please keep in mind these frequencies are small. So the chart looks big, frequencies are small, so you have to kind of take that into consideration. It's going to be a more volatile number. That's why I like you to kind of be able to look and go, oh, gosh, you might panic on one year and then not panic so much in the next year, right? Because you're going to see some fluctuations in that data. But there's our 24-25 last year. General liability severity, same thing. Again, these are looking at single year data points for averages in that performance year. And then you can stop and you can see how that can change in 1 year as we close claims, as we settle claims, and how some of that dynamic can be pretty big swings there. Again, the idea is that you see something that you want to look at deeper, and you go to your claims details to inform some of your decisions and what you're really concerned about or not. Again, you can look at that later, a lot of just summary. Here's our nice little chart. You'll also see on this particular one, there's an added kind of green area there where we have a few districts who didn't have any claims within that given year, and so you'll have a list of those too. So congratulations to those districts not seeing claims in that claim year. And here's our errors and omissions. This has a big swing. Again, only less than 3 claims out by average, and so take that into consideration for those years, and then you can see how the claims have shaped out last year. You're going to see more claims as claims are not closed or you're getting closer to the current year. Some of those claims are open, so those numbers might be a little higher. Errors and omissions severity categories. And again, yes. I'm sorry. Errors and omissions? I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. And CJ, do you want to answer that? A lot of it is going to be your claims against the district for liabilities of the district, sexual abuse, employee misconducts, different. Stephanie, go ahead. discrimination suits, federal suits where they're basically suing the school district or its employees for misconducts.
The reason I asked is that, like, you know, you serve on a committee or something. I'm like a board chair, and they have errors and omissions and stuff, like in case somebody steals the money and runs off. So I was just trying to figure out, like, if that was the same kind of coverage, so I could go back and ask some questions.
General liability.
We have a separate policy called crime coverage. So if you did, like if an employee stole $100,000, that would go through your crime coverage and not through the E&O coverage. If that makes any sense.
So yeah, I was wondering if this was that type, like same types of loss. That's why I was asking the question. I'm trying to figure out what falls in what.
They have separate coverage for their board. Yes, so can you speak to that, Stephanie? We don't get too much of that, but you guys have separate coverage that you retain for board action.
No, but I was talking about, like, I'm a nonprofit board, so you know, like, if someone does something and they have a policy. So that's why I was trying to figure out if this was that type of coverage.
It's error and omissions in their scope of duty, right? So if they make some kind of mistake that's covered under the policy, that's what's going to be covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And general liability can have a little bleed over because you can have a supervision issue or an employee who there's a student accident and they claim that there was poor supervision, but this is really more pointed at a particular action of an employee that resulted in the lawsuit, you know, kind of more targeted towards that individual.
Okay.
A lot more of your HR type claims, I would say, and the other is more encompassing. General liability might also be an accident that occurs with a citizen that's on a campus, that kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
And Tina, Trust Orientation Module 4 will define that for you.
I'll be sure to watch it. You just but in my defense, you just shared that with us today.
That's great. We're thankful we don't have too many of these claims, so that's a positive thing. But usually when we do, the severity is ugly. It's tough. A lot of attorney's fees involved. If it's a federal lawsuit, this is where some of our volatility and our costs within the casualty loss fund can come into play. Here's your 23-24 errors and omissions. You can see in that particular year the number of open claims significantly. Many of our districts not having anything to hit the chart at all. So again, you're seeing it's our bigger districts that have more volume that are making that chart. Claim counts were low, again, in that particular year, just giving you a heads up about that. Again, this is something for you to kind of have reference to as you look deeper at the data. Here's our vehicle data. You can see a lot more frequency, of course. Auto, including bus accidents, are part of this as well. This is going to be our auto liability categories, auto frequency exposures on average, and how our districts shape up. And then there's our 25 data, just straight incidents, straight frequency numbers. Sorry I'm going fast, but I hope that's okay with you guys. Stop me if you want me to look a little closer at something. We'll be available to answer questions after as well. But I want to show you what was here. Auto severity data, again, this is size rated against the exposures. Actual number of vehicles is actually the comparison data there. And then your severity of losses for the current, or prior year, sorry, 24-25. Just strict numbers. Here's our charting there for auto. You can see it. Just about everybody's made the chart. Lafayette, except Lafayette. They don't let people have auto accidents either. I'm not sure how they do that, but check with Gerald. Yeah. We keep going. Windex, little Windex on it, you're good to go. Is that my big fat Greek wedding? That's yeah. Little Windex fixes it, and we're good to go. Auto frequency, wrapping up property, and one of the things I want to say about some of the data around non-work comp, we have great work comp boring down into details, cause, major cause, different things. We're trying to refine that as we go, not so much on the other side of the house, on the PNC. We don't have some of that data in the system. It's one of our targeted strategic planning goals is to break out that data and get some causal data and more details about the nature of the autos that are involved for some better data on that side of the house for you guys to analyze a little closer. So we're working to improve that for you. Here's our property frequency by district. Property severity charts and then here's your frequency and severity by district 23, 24. So this gives you your frequency on the top, severity on the bottom. We still have some of those lingering property claims that you see that volatility on. Otherwise, not too much volatility around the property claims. And I think to Stephanie's question earlier, we'll probably start breaking that out and getting that broken out by the actuary and also in some of our data with Alliance so that we can separate out those named storm claims so you can see more of the details within just the basic property auto claims. And property in general. I'm sorry, not property auto, property in general. Property damage from lightning is probably, I'd say, our most common, CJ, yeah, those types of claims. Property frequency and severity by district current year, these are your incident and your dollar amounts. Again, those smaller dollar amounts are, most of them are attributed to specific property events, the occasional flood, the lightning strikes, other damages that might occur, pipe busting, things like that. Boiler and machinery. Yep. All right, we're going to get to your data. Wanted to just remind you of that. You'll see some of your bore down data coming to you. The claims committee is going to be looking closer at the data and giving some risk takeaways. Did go ahead and give you a 5-year frequency peak at the actual losses. This is going to be work comp again only, and you can see slips and falls without fail, not only in our data, but across any data that we've seen from anybody else, and in conversations with other pools, these are your hot spots in schools. Slips and falls is usually first, followed by those struck by injuries. Those are, again, mostly your students with disabilities and challenges to dealing with physical aggression and employees getting hurt around that. The thing I want you to notice about this data, a lot of times we do feel helpless about the ESE side of the house, working with some of the districts on some things that you can do to impact that area. But what I want you to see is we've got a high frequency for ESE. You can see it's almost aligned, with struck by injuries. They're not always students with disabilities. There's also a lot of little kindergartners in there that never went to preschool that showed up and panicked at the beginning of the year. So struck by injuries in that category is almost in line within a couple of hundred of the other, but look at the category for severity. So we've got over double the cost factor for a slip and fall. It's not the most romantic thing to focus on, right? It has some repetitive nature to the risk control side of it. It's very, people get like, oh, I know that. I'm already doing the things that I need to do. most of the accidents that we see around slips and falls are people just making dumb mistakes. They're in a hurry. They're not being careful. Their shoe wear. Some of these basic things. There's not wet floor signs being utilized consistently. There's not implementation of reminders of safety processes. And so looking at your routines around how you keep bringing this topic up in front of your people without them losing interest. You know, it's not necessarily about the hour-long presentation at the beginning of the year, but how you can continue to embed some safety reminders around this topic right here. You've got to have your schools on board. You've got to have your safety committees at your schools engaged, and you hopefully have to have your administrators making it a priority to feed in these little reminders and creating a safety culture as much as you can. But that's your big dollar amount. That's where your impact can be financially if you can put some preventative measures to impact that. It's pretty tough areas, but those are our hot spots. Standing in chairs, hanging things. Yes, thank you, David. He's hitting the fire hint there about hanging things and the slips and falls. Got them both covered. So risk mitigation we'll continue to focus on. FSBIT is here to support. We're working on building out additional data areas for you. We're going to do some recognitions of progress in January at the January meeting. And we continue to try to get some consistent data for you, and our overall goal is just to help you keep moving that risk needle where you can. All right, questions? I'm finished. We're done. Okay. Oh, one thing. Oh, good. I'm not last.
So, what is our appetite for beginning our meeting in the morning at 8 rather than 8:30? I'm seeing several thumbs up. Do I see any thumbs down? 8 o'clock it is. So breakfast, I guess, can we adjust it so breakfast is at 7? Ken?
Eat fast.
Yeah, we can 7:30. We can eat fast. We don't, you know. All right. Good job. All right. Enjoy your little brief respite here. Freshen up, and we'll see you at 6 o'clock for